Mr. President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. What we saw in Roseburg last week was a repeat of the evil that we've seen in countless places across the country, causing tens of thousands of deaths in towns and cities and suburbs, in rural areas across this country. Evil visited Roseburg. We saw the worst of human character in those moments of mass killing. We saw also the best in human character in the response from the firemen and police and emergency responders who risked their lives and saved lives. When the sound of gunshots shattered that morning, my own recollection was triggered of a morning just a few years earlier when I stood with the parents and loved ones on that day of the mass slaughter in Sandy Hook and Newtown. My thoughts and prayers are with the people of Roseburg, with the loved ones of victims. I know that nothing said here, certainly nothing I can say, will help mend those wounds and ease the grief and pain of those loved ones for the great lives lost and the many left behind. I am frustrated and angry coming here today because the places of those mass killings have become shorthand for a deep disease, an epidemic of violence in America today. Virginia Tech, Columbine, Charleston, Sandy Hook, Newtown, and now Roseburg. They are shorthand for mass slaughters, which have occurred at the rate of about one a week while President Obama has been in office. There have been 142 school shootings since Newtown alone, 30,000 deaths per year in America, the greatest, strongest country in the history of the world. And the mass killings are not even the source of the largest numbers. They are individual deaths, like Javier Martinez, a young man from New Haven with an enormously bright and promising future. When I visited his school after he was killed by a gun, because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, his classmates asked me to talk here about gun violence, not as an abstract notion, but a real threat to them and their community. It is a phenomenon that faces every community, every day, everywhere, and everyone. And all of us are touched by it. If we think about it, if we put aside the denial that all too often affects us, a denial that causes people to minimize the threat, we all are victims, or we know victims, or we know of the tragic consequences of real stories in our communities as a result of gun violence. The deaths in Roseburg are tragic, but no less tragic was Javier Martinez, nor the gun deaths that occur in situations involving domestic violence, gangs, fights between individuals, accidents, suicides. A major source of death by gun violence, suicides, and countless other circumstances where people who are dangerous or who lack the mental health or the maturity to responsibly use a gun, nonetheless have access to them and use them for deadly purposes. And let's be very clear. The Second Amendment is a guarantee under our Constitution to law-abiding citizens that they can use guns for lawful purposes, whether it's recreational or hunting, that they can possess as many as they please, and the vast majority of them support measures that will keep guns out of the hands of dangerous people. Keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people is the reason that we have advanced common sense, sensible measures to stop gun violence. And the failure to adopt them has made Congress complicit. In effect, an aider and abettor to those deaths, because Congress has enabled the continuation of death and destruction that has become a fact of life in America, a disgraceful and shameful emblem of Congress's failure to act. There is a point when inaction causes culpability, when it becomes, in effect, aiding and abetting and complicity. Congress, in some ways, might just as well be standing at the elbow of those shooters, whether it is in Charleston or Roseburg or Sandy Hook or elsewhere. So regret and grief is appropriate, but it's no solution. It's no excuse for inaction. Inaction is reprehensible when it comes to gun violence, an epidemic and disease spreading in this country just as surely as a contagion or infection. The action of this body, or inaction, speaks louder than words. And my simple reaction is enough. Enough of inaction. The time for action is now on universal background checks, a ban on illegal trafficking and straw purchases, a prohibition on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, as well as a mental health initiative and school safety measures. This kind of comprehensive package of reforms has been proposed. This body failed to adopt it, but that is no excuse for inaction now. There's no one measure, no single solution, no panacea, no simple fix to this problem, but we must begin because laws have consequences. I refuse to adopt the defeatist or denial approach of many of our colleagues who say that the laws simply won't work, can't do anything, won't solve a problem. We're here because we believe laws can improve the lives of ordinary Americans, no less so when it comes to gun violence than any of the other problems we address. In fact, we ought to approach this issue of gun violence with the same urgency and immediacy that America would attempt to solve any public health crisis, because surely we face a public health crisis and emergency in gun violence. When there is a spread of a contagious disease, whether it's flu or tuberculosis or Ebola, we track down the source, hospitalize the victims, take remedial action, admit them to treatment, and take preventive measures to prevent that kind of disease from recurring. When there is a spread of food poisoning, we don't throw up our arms and say that there's nothing that laws can do. In fact, law enforcement and health authorities track down the packages that are contaminated and again provide relief for the people who suffer from that kind of disease and take preventive measures to stop it from reoccurring by imposing sanitary conditions and rules and regulations on the food producers. Infection, contagion, spread of disease can be deadly and crippling and threaten fear and harm, cause panic, and gun violence is exactly the same. It is equally insidious and pernicious, and its impact, in fact, is greater than any of those single epidemics. The spread of stolen guns guns that are stolen or illegally purchased is much like a disease in America today. And the ones who will testify to that fact are our law enforcement authorities who see it firsthand and are on our side in urging responsible, common sense measures and reform. When this nation faced, in effect, an epidemic of car deaths and injuries, we didn't stop everyone from driving, but we did put in place reasonable safeguards, seatbelt laws, drunk driving measures, age restrictions, speed limits, and we enforced them. They were resisted at the time. Drunk driving measures caused outrage among some civil libertarians. But now they are part of our everyday expectations about how life will work in America, and they have drastically reduced auto fatalities and injuries. The recognition of the damage and destruction that can be caused by automobiles means that we educate and we take common sense, responsible measures. And much of the knowledge that led to those common sense, sensible measures came from research. Yes, knowledge. It was fact-based, evidence-driven. Research done by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Like many of my colleagues, I am dismayed by the fact that similar, incredibly valuable public health data from this world-class institution is unavailable to us about gun violence because of the restrictive, politically motivated budget writers forbidding it. It's unconscionable that Congress's response to this problem is denial, shutting out research and responsible fact-based evidence involving the provision of information. This country knows how to respond to a public health crisis. We're America. We face the challenges, not deny them or disparage the truth teller. After the Stockton schoolyard shooting in California, where 34 children were killed and 34 children were shot and 5 killed, President George H.W. Bush issued an executive order in 1989 banning the import of semi-automatic assault rifles. There were repeated circumvention of that order, and part of the response was in 1994, a measure authored by Senator Feinstein, our great colleague, banning the manufacture and transfer of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. That measure expired, but it shows how we can act and we can face challenges. Ronald Reagan was almost killed by an assassin's bullet, a would-be assassin's bullet in 1981. 10 years after the event, he wrote in the New York Times that if the bill, the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, reduced gun deaths by as little as 10%, it would be, quote, well worth making it the law of the land because there would be a lot fewer families facing anniversaries such as the Bradys and the Reagans face every March 30th. That bill, the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, became law in 1993 with his support 12 years after that near assassination. And both Stockton and the Reagan assassination, near assassination, show that these measures are possible. It may look like a marathon. It's never a sprint. It is not only possible, it is obligatory. I look forward to a number of my colleagues and myself, and I note that a partner in this effort has been my colleague, Senator Murphy, who will follow me shortly, all of us coming together and spearheading and championing again a set of reforms that will help make America safer and better. Mr. President, the time for action truly is now. This public health emergency cannot go unaddressed. The gaps in our current laws can be remedied. I've already offered the Lori Jackson Violence Survivor Protection Act, a bill named for a brave Connecticut mother of 2 children who was estranged from her husband, fled her home for her life, obtained a temporary restraining order for her and her children's protection, and then was gunned down by her estranged husband because the temporary protective order did not require him to surrender his weapons. A gap in the law that must be remedied, and that bill would do so. This bill is modest. My bill would close this loophole, requiring protective orders, whether temporary or permanent, to require the surrendering of weapons. Women who are victims of domestic violence are at the greatest risk. Women who are victims of this insidious peril are most in danger when they first leave or try to leave. That's when the temporary order is, in effect, most necessary, the danger at its greatest, but the law at its weakest in stopping gun violence. We are on the right side of history. We're on the right side of law enforcement. We're on the right side of public opinion. The overwhelming majority of Americans clearly favor these kinds of measures, and the overwhelming majority of gun owners, too. If history is on our side, we must be on the right side of this issue. I urge my colleagues to join with us in this effort to keep faith with the victims of Newtown and Sandy Hook, to demonstrate that our grief and regret is more than just words, that it will lead to action, and the time for action is now. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me thank Senator Blumenthal for being such a great partner. He and I have traveled a very long journey together since December of 2012, when we both stood together at the firehouse in Sandy Hook, Connecticut. And we have become evangelical in our belief that this mass slaughter has to stop. And on Friday, we all stopped for a moment, and we sent our sympathies to those who were killed in Portland: Lucero Alcarez, Trevin Taylor Anspech, Rebecca Ann Carnes, Quinn Glenn Cooper, Kim Dietz, Lucas Eibel, Jason Dale Johnson, Lawrence Levine, who's an assistant professor there, and Serena Dawn Moore. 274 days this year and 294 mass shootings. We're averaging one mass shooting. That's multiple people being shot at one particular moment. More mass shootings than we've had days in the year. And of course, for us, this shooting and the information that came out in the aftermath of it was particularly chilling, because we've seen this young man before. Young man, Christopher Harper Mercer, was isolated, withdrawn, obsessed with guns. His family had many of them. He had rebuffed attempts at socialization by his family. He had grievances that he mainly shared with himself, and he eventually turned those grievances on 9 people who died and about an equal number who were injured. We know that story because we saw it play out in Connecticut as well. A mentally ill individual, a young man who became isolated from his friends, from his community, from his family, who had a rather large store of weapons, who then took out his frustrations and his outrage on 20 little kids in Sandy Hook Elementary. But I guess what to me is definitional about this scourge of mass violence is not necessarily what happened on Friday, but what happened the day after, on Saturday. On Saturday, there were likely another 80 people killed by guns all across the country. That's about the number we run every single day. And every day there are a handful of really exceptional stories that make your heart turn, that make your gut cringe. And on Saturday, there was a 11-year-old boy who confronted his 8-year-old neighbor in Tennessee over the fact that she wouldn't let him play with her pet bunny. And when she protested and said that she didn't want him to play with it, he marched back into his house, got a shotgun, walked back over to her, and shot her. The shotgun. How on earth did an 11-year-old boy get that quick access to a shotgun? How on earth did we get into a moment in which a dispute over whether or not you can hold a little pet bunny turns into a murder? What I can tell you is that I guarantee that that scene doesn't play out in other countries in this world. That 11-year-old boys don't shoot 8-year-old girls with shotguns in Sweden or Japan, in Great Britain. And we know that because what is happening here in the United States is exceptional. This rate of 80 people being lost to guns every day, this normalization of mass shootings, is exclusive to the United States. We have a gun homicide rate in the United States that isn't twice the average of other OECD countries. It's not 5 times, it's not 10 times, it's 20 times the average of our first world competitor nations. And so you have to ask ourselves, what's different about the United States? What's different about life here, the way in which we resolve disputes, than all of these other nations that have gun violence, gun death rates that are 20 times lower than the United States? And let's be honest about one thing. It's not that the United States has higher rates of mental illness than other countries. It's not that our mental health delivery system spends less than other countries. There's no more mental illness in the United States than there is in any other industrialized country. Some studies will tell you that we spend more on mental illness treatment and behavioral health treatment than any other country. And yet, gun deaths are 20 times what they are in other countries. It's not because we lack for protection. Our malls and our churches and our movie theaters aren't any less protected or less secure than those in other countries. We invest in law enforcement at a same or greater rate than all of these other nations. What's different? What's different here in this country? What's different is that we're awash in guns. We're awash in illegal guns. We celebrate weapons that are designed exclusively to kill other people. And we collect them and show them off for sport. Military-style assault weapons, cartridges, drums of ammunition that hold 100 rounds, whose utility is only associated with ending life. That's what's different. That's what's different about the United States. Now, I'll admit that the solution is comprehensive, because I'll be the last person to tell you that fixing our mental health system won't have a beneficial effect on the rates of gun violence. Adam Lanza and Christopher Harper Mercer were deeply troubled individuals who were ill-served by a behavioral health system that was far too opaque and complex for them. Law enforcement needs more help on the streets of New Haven and New York and Chicago and Los Angeles. All of those things will help. But what distinguishes America from the other parts of the world that have much lower rates of gun violence is not investment in law enforcement and is not our rates of mental illness. So we have to have this conversation about our laws that allow for this flow of high-powered guns and illegal guns onto the street. Senator Blumenthal and I are going to join together tomorrow to introduce what we think is a modest measure to just assure that no guns get sold to people who can't pass a background check. Walmart does it today. They say, we won't sell you a gun unless you can pass a background check. But unfortunately, many other retailers take advantage of a loophole that allows for 72 hours to pass without a background check, which then allows them to sell a gun. We just think there should be a simple premise. If you can't pass a background check, you shouldn't be able to get a gun. Got to get a green light to be able to walk out of a store with a weapon that can kill people. But that's just one brick in the wall. There's a series of other measures that enjoy 90% support in this country, whether it be making sure that people who are subject to restraining orders against their spouse can't buy a gun during the period of time in which they're under a legal restraining order, or just expanding background checks to gun shows and internet sales, or just giving more resources to the background check system so they can make sure that they upload the proper records. And mental health is part of the solution. It's not a substitute for the reform of our gun laws, but it's part of the solution as well. And I'm proud to have joined with Senator Cassidy to introduce the primary comprehensive mental health reform legislation on the floor of the Senate. We've got, I think, 10 co-sponsors at this moment, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats. And we think you should fix the mental health system because it's broken, full stop. But we also understand that it'll have a downward effect on gun violence. And let me just close by echoing the sentiments of Senator Blumenthal. We're going to introduce our legislation tomorrow, and we're hopeful that it'll be taken up by this body. But what we really worry about is that this silence from Congress has become complicity. And I know that sounds like a really hard thing to say. That sounds very hyperbolic. But let me walk you through why I've come to believe that the failure to act in the wake of these mass shootings has made us complicit in them. I think these young men, and it's not all young men, but it's mostly young men, these young men whose minds are becoming unhinged and are contemplating mass violence, they take cues from the total, complete, absolute silence from Congress in the face of mass shooting after mass shooting. If the nation's top elected leaders, the people charged with deciding what matters in this nation, don't even try to stop the mass carnage, then these would-be shooters reasonably conclude that we must be okay with it. Because if a society doesn't condone settling a grievance with a gun, wouldn't the people in charge of it at least try to stop it? But we don't try. And that's what's most offensive. That's what truly turns my stomach. We just lived through a summer in which 4,000 people died on the streets of this nation. And this body is sending a loud, clear signal that we don't care. We don't care. 9 more people died on Friday. Another mass slaughter. And we're back to normal this week. We're going to debate the Toxic Substances Control Act this week. And I don't deny that that's probably a very important piece of legislation. But we're acting as if there isn't an epidemic of preventable murder happening in this nation, and that it's getting worse. Somebody wrote last week that the gun control debate ended the day after Sandy Hook, because that was the day that America decided that it was okay to murder 21st graders. Now, I know that's not the message that my colleagues are intending to send, and we appreciate all of the sincere notes of sympathy that have been sent over the course of the last 2 years, 3 years to Newtown, and those that went out on Friday to Oregon. But words are beginning to become meaningless. The tweets really aren't helping. I'd argue that they're just becoming a cover for cowardice. It's not a coincidence that America has a gun violence rate that is 20 times that of any other competitor nation. We are doing something wrong here. And the whole reason we draw our paychecks is to make wrong things right. If we can't do something, a background checks law, a mental health bill, more resources for law enforcement, if we can't do anything to try to stop this soul-crushing, life-extinguishing violence, then we might as well just go home. I yield the floor.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.